I'm Scott Al Miller. It is the 9th of December, 2023. This is my vlog of daily life living in Leon, Nicaragua. For those who are living up north in the United States or Canada, this is what December looks like here. In Nicaragua, it is in the mid-30s. That puts it in the low 90s. Not right now, it's early morning, so we're still in the 80s, but it will be in the mid-90s by later today. Talking to people up north, when they're talking about all the snow they're getting and all the cold weather, we're like, oh yeah, we forget that it's like that. We know it's colder up there, but we forget that you're in the middle of snowstorms and such, and we're down here in the 90s enjoying this beautiful weather. So that is what's going on here. And speaking of weather and how it affects Latin America, today we're going to be talking, because one of my viewers asked, about how altitude really plays into choosing a location for the weather here in Latin America when you're looking for relocation or really even just vacation. So we're going to get to that right after the bump. If you've never researched Latin America from a climatic perspective, you may not have thought about the fact that the vast majority of Latin America falls into the tropical zone, and those parts that do not fall into the tropics fall almost entirely into the subtropics. This includes the northern half of Mexico in the subtropics and the heavily populated southern cone regions in the subtropics on that side. Everything in between is in the tropics, from Mexico City all the way down to, say, northern Uruguay. This means that huge amounts of the population are in parts of the world that are generally considered extremely hot. If you were to go to the old world and look at which regions fall into the same zones there, you're looking at the majority of the middle of sub-Saharan Africa. That is the tropical zone there. In Asia, there's only a few places that are actually tropical. Southern China, like Hong Kong, or the majority of India, mostly in the south. Those areas are tropical there, but the tropics in that region, other than Africa, are mostly in the Indian Ocean. So actually, Africa and South America have the majority of the world that falls into the tropical zone. Of course, those portions of Asia that are physically very small do have an awful lot of people. So the majority of people in the tropics are in Asia for sure. But from a landmass, from a regional perspective, Africa and South America represent the physical bulk of the tropical zone land. Because of this, we often think of Latin America as being very, very warm, especially when you consider that the portions of the United States that are in the subtropics, there's no tropical portion of the United States, are places like Florida or Texas or Arizona, places that are extremely hot. So when you think about that subtropical and then going even closer to the equator, Latin America must be brutal. But one of the factors, and we talked about this recently, is that Latin America is colder than you think it is because altitude plays a major role. But when you're in the north, say in the mild latitudes, right, like the northern United States and Europe, that region of the world has the most mild weather at sea level, but it also is where the seasons are strong. That's where you're getting this hot summer, this cold winter, a full spring, all the autumn, everything going on, all those changes. That's happening in that zone, in that very mild zone that we think of with much of the population of the US and the entire population of Europe. In those latitudes, if you are to, in the temperate zone, as that is known, if you were to go to altitude, what you do with any altitude is you simply reduce the temperature of where you are, along with a few other factors. That means that if you live in New York, for example, and you were to go to high altitude there, which is difficult to do, there's not very many high altitude places in New York, but if you do go up into the Adirondacks and go up to the top of the highest mountains, what you get is a reduction in temperature. But if that means that it's hitting 90 in the summer, maybe it's hitting 87 at the top of the mountain. But in the winter, if it's hitting -30, now it's hitting -33, that kind of thing. You're just lowering what you already have as the temperature around it. So when you're in the temperate zone, where the weather is already on average really beautiful, being at altitude often carries a lot of negatives because it's simply taking the already mild average weather and making it just a little bit colder. That's not something you really want. Most of those places want their average to be warmer. Now, if you're able to go up to a mountaintop on a summer day and come down to sea level on a winter day, that could be beneficial, But you have to make that physical change. And when you're talking about where you're going to relocate to, that's generally not how you're going to consider it. There are exceptions, of course. There are some people who want to go to the mountains when it's hot and go to the sea, or when it's cold, to even things out. But that's not normally how we think of it. We're looking for a single place that you can live that has the weather that you want. So it is traditional to desire relatively close to sea level in the temperate zone, because that's what's going to give you your best year-round averages. Plus, it's just easier to not have to go up a mountain all the time. When you're in the tropical zone, one of the things that changes, obviously, is the heat. Everything is just warmer on average as you get closer to the equator. But it's more than that. It's also in that zone, you start giving up your seasons. When you're actually on the equator, there are no seasons at all. When you're anywhere in the tropical zone, you effectively have no seasons. Other things like small changes in like the rain or monsoons or whatever are going to have a much larger effect on your seasonal variations than the summer-winter type seasons will. So in reality, in the U.S., we're taught that summer, winter, spring, fall, these are very strict things with very strict dates, and this is just when they happen. But when you live in the tropics, you learn that those are not recognized seasons in a huge portion of the world, and it just doesn't work that way all the time. So it's true, if you live in New York like I did, or Oregon, those seasons are very strict definitions. But if you live here, it is a two-season system, and they refer to rainy and dry, not summer and winter, or spring or fall, or whatever. So the world changes a lot. So in this tropical zone, you really don't have seasons or seasons as you think of them, and you have this overall warmer temperature. So because that temperature is much more even year-round, coming from New York, I'm used to a swing in Fahrenheit from the 90s to the negative, like really serious negatives, right? Easily in a single year, a swing of 100 to 120 degrees is not unheard of. Coming to this region, a swing throughout the year of 20 degrees would be much more likely. And we're not in the equator zone, right? We're not equatorial, we're just tropical. If you go down to like Ecuador or where the DRC, you're going to get variations that are even smaller in most cases, sometimes down to just a few degrees. So that change of seasonal effect is really significant in how you will look at the weather. Where you pick is going to be, if you pick a hot place, it's just always going to be hot. If you pick a cold place, it's always going to be cold. The idea that, well, it's hot part of the year, cold part of the year, and it's the average that you're shooting for, or the mix of things, is very different. So because of that, in the tropical zone, if you want to get away from the unbelievable heat that is normal at those latitudes, your only way to do that is by going to higher elevation. But this works pretty well because unlike the temperate zone, we don't have those seasons. So when you go up a mountain, and the mountains in this zone here in Latin America, which we'll talk about in a second, are so high that you actually get large drops, not just 3 degrees, but maybe 30 or 40 degrees at the most extremes. So you could be in an area that would otherwise be unbearable, maybe 95, 100, 110 degrees if you were at sea level, and you go up a mountain, you might be at 70 or 80 degrees. This is all Fahrenheit. So that can make it incredibly comfortable to live at a latitude that otherwise would be unbearably hot. Here in Nicaragua, we're so far from the equator that even though we live at sea level, it's still quite bearable. Very warm. Lots of my viewers who have visited are like, it's hot, I can't handle it, right? We understand that, but it is still mild compared to if you were living at sea level, much closer to the equator, somewhere around Ecuador, for example, that would get very hot, but there's a reason why cities don't generally exist around sea level down there. It just doesn't end up making sense. Once in a while, you end up with just like the right ocean currents or something to keep a place cooler, so it does happen sometimes, but in general, there's a reason why people head to the mountains. So this effect creates a need when you're in the tropical zone to live on the mountains, and a not need but a general desire when you live in the temperate zone to live in the valleys. And we think of it that way. When you come from New York or Ohio or Ontario or anywhere in New England or Montana, very rarely do we think of, let's put our population centers up on the mountains. That would be really cold and inconvenient. We think, a valley. Valleys are where the farms go. Valleys are where the villages go. That's where we build our cities. And that's the American mentality because it's a temperate country and very much a European thing as well. You go to Europe, you do not find very many of your population centers up in the Alps. You find them down by the Rhine. That's what makes sense, being at really close to sea level So you get the weather that makes sense for you and where you can grow your produce. When you're in the tropics, the same effect takes you up into the mountains. You want to be up where humans can live the easiest, and so you get a lot of people living up in the mountains. Now, when we look at Africa and the tropics, you have almost no mountains. Tropical Africa is incredibly low altitude, and this makes it really hot most of the time. When you're thinking about countries like the DRC, which is the largest portion of the equatorial region in Africa, it is hot, right? They do have mountains, but there's not that many. They're really in low-lying jungle in much of the country, and that makes it relatively unbearable compared to what we see in South America. But in South America, we have the world's second highest and definitely the largest spread geographically mountain range in the Andes. And this provides very high altitude regions where a lot of the population of South America is able to live. Of course, there are large portions that live in other places. The Amazon basin, for example, most of Brazil does not have high altitude, so Brazil tends to be much hotter than the rest of South America. But places like Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Chile, they all have, Argentina for sure, Bolivia, obviously, lots and lots and lots of very high mountains, and their populations primarily live up in that zone. So we do have a bit of a differentiation. Portuguese-speaking South America has a tendency towards very warm living, and Spanish-speaking South America has a tendency towards very mild living simply because of their available altitude changes. Because South America offers so many high-altitude options, it has become the standard that the majority of at least those in the Spanish-speaking world where they have it available, to live at high altitude. And this makes a lot of South America and bits of Central America, right? Costa Rica, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, all of them have quite a bit of elevation, and Mexico as well. Lots of elevation regions, so they're able to put the majority of their populations up at altitudes, giving them mild temperatures. Now, that really defines much of the Latin American experience and is contrary to what a lot of people picture as Latin America. We tend to picture the beaches because that's what's exciting, right? That's where vacationers want to go. Typically, people who are vacationing in Latin America are coming from the US, coming from Canada during the winter. They're looking to escape the snow. They don't want to go someplace mild. They want to go someplace hot. At least that's what they're picturing. So they're looking at places like Cancun. They're thinking about the beaches of Rio de Janeiro, somewhere where they can get into the ocean, strip down, cook in the sun, replace their vitamin D, and escape the winters that they're dragging on in the north. So that carries back to the home countries as this picture of Latin America being much warmer than it actually is, at least on a population basis. So because of that, in reality, Latin America offers this incredibly mild living experience for the vast majority of it, or at least options to have a lot of mild living that we often do not picture. I was also asked in the question is, does this high altitude, as is used through much of South America, cause problems with thinner air? And this is something to be concerned about a little bit, but relatively little. The majority of high altitude locations are not that high altitude. They're high, but they're not high to the point where it's going to cause respiratory problems. There are a few cities where this is notably untrue. La Paz, where I just was in Bolivia, is the highest of all the examples. But places like Quito or Cusco, there are also cities that are so high in altitude that you may have some respiratory challenges. There's a few like this. In general, you don't have to worry about this in normal population centers. Just be aware that if you are going to be traveling to some of those, you may need time to adjust. It's very rare that if you are actually looking at moving somewhere that it's going to be a problem, unless it's the convenience of traveling in and out or people coming to visit you. Then there may be challenges simply because it requires this transition time to go to and from those different locations. And in general, it's not a big deal. Yes, the air is thinner. No, that does not generally have an impact on most of life. La Paz being very key exception to that. So in general, Latin America is all about altitude. It makes life mild because they're in the tropics. If you were other places, it would not make things mild. It would just make them cold and more brutal because it's already cool and you're just taking the existing temperatures and lowering them. So it's very much a tropical thing. Latin America is the one area of the world where so many people have the option of the high altitude while living in the tropics. It makes it unique, more or less, worldwide. So now, my day, I've been putting in a lot of time over the last few weeks trying to spend a lot of time with my kids. We've just been really busy. I was traveling, all kinds of stuff, and I haven't had as much time with them as I like, which of course, I just want to spend all my time with my kids. But we try to put in a good amount of time every day, and my children and I do a lot of video gaming together. It's something we've always enjoyed. They're big time video gamers. I really enjoy video gaming, and so we try to do that. So just recently, I think I mentioned it. We played through Detroit Become Human together. That was amazing. On today, I believe we completed Beyond Two Souls. That was really good. Same team that made Detroit Become Human. I like Detroit Become Human a little bit more. Beyond Two Souls a little bit more award-winning. Both are excellent games. Lots of great storytelling. My youngest, Luciana, is now playing Red Dead Redemption 2. So we're watching her play. I'm playing the original Red Dead Redemption. They're watching me play that. Liesel, my eldest, is playing Grand Theft Auto 5, and we're watching her play that. And we just completed together as well. In the same day, we completed Beyond Two Souls and the Paynes Creek Killings, which is a murder mystery walking simulator where you have to go and be an investigator and walk around this town years after a number of murders had taken place and see if you can piece together what had happened, storytelling through the discovery of artifacts as you go. It was really interesting, and we completed those together. So we've had a lot of video gaming time over the last week or two since I've been back from Bolivia, and we had the Quince and all that stuff. So that's been really cool. We've really been enjoying having that time together. And a lot of this is possible because we recently got our video game room set up. We did have it previously, but not for that long before I went to Bolivia. Now we have a couch and the TV and all the video game setup, like everything's in there and works. And so we're able to just go in and camp out on the couch together. The dogs come in with us. We turn on the air conditioning, and we have this beautiful video gaming space where we can really just relax and get into the game, turn off the light. It's nice and cool, have blankets, snuggle the dogs, and play these games. So now that we have that, it took us forever to have that set up. We've been living here for 2 years, well, 3 years in total, in Nicaragua, that we haven't had a really serious video game room, and this is such a big thing that we do. We really need one, and now that we have it, it really shows. Like, this is in the evenings, once I'm done with work, I just get the girls like, okay, let's grab dinner, let's go in the video game room, fire up a game, get something ready, and let's play. And we're able to get a lot of time in, and we're going through a lot of games. So that's been really fantastic and a big thing going on here. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. Take a moment to share this on social media if you can, if you'd like to support the channel. You can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ScottAllenMiller. And as always, let your friends and family know about the show, and I will see all of you tomorrow.